My name is Emily Harper. I'm 29 years old. And this is the story of how the man who once humiliated me at his wedding ended up being the reason I uncovered one of the biggest scandals in our town's history. The measuring spoon slipped from my hand, clattering noisily against the stainless steel mixing bowl. The sound echoed through the stillness of my bakery kitchen and stabbed through the quiet like a warning. My hands were trembling. I couldn't hide it, not even from myself. I had made wedding cakes for over 100 couples in the past 3 years, but this one felt like it would be the end of me. Ryan Anderson. His name was scrawled on the contract like a scar I couldn't erase. He was marrying Madison Adams, local royalty, practically. Her family owned half the buildings downtown, and her face was in every society magazine this side of the state. And here I was, the girl Ryan once dumped like expired milk because, and I quote, "You'll always be just a small-town baker with frosting under your nails." I stared at the bowl of batter, heart pounding as though I'd run a marathon. The kitchen smelled of butter and vanilla, a scent I usually found comforting, but today it just dragged me into the past. Into memories I'd buried deep beneath layers of chocolate and shame. "You need to cancel this contract. Now." Julia's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. She leaned against the counter with arms folded across her chest, brown eyes tight with concern. Julia was my best friend, my right hand at the bakery, and the kind of woman who never sugar-coated anything, even when working in a bakery. "This isn't just any cake, Em. This is his wedding. You don't owe him anything." "I know," I said softly, not meeting her eyes as I stirred the batter again. "But it's not about him." Julia stepped closer and grabbed the whisk from my hands. "Then what is it about?" "Proving something. 'Cause you don't have to. You've already made it. Look around." I looked up, the soft golden light of the afternoon spilling in through the front windows. The sweet spot had started as a rundown corner store, and now it was the busiest bakery in Willow Creek. People lined up on Saturdays for my almond croissants. Brides booked my calendar 6 months in advance. I had regulars, a loyal community, a reputation. But despite all that, his voice still echoed. "A baker. Come on. You're better than that. Move to the city with me. I'll get you a real job." I had said no and he had said goodbye. "I'm not doing this for him," I whispered, more to myself than to Julia. "I'm doing this for me. For the sweet spot. The people at that wedding, their clients. Big ones. Madison Adams's guest list includes real estate moguls, developers, even social media influencers. If they like the cake, they talk. If they talk, we grow. That's how this works." Julia didn't say anything for a long moment. Then slowly she exhaled. "Fine. Then let me come with you. You shouldn't face them alone." "I'll be fine," I lied. "It's just a delivery. Just business." Julia raised an eyebrow. "You keep saying that. But do you believe it?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. That night, I stayed at the bakery until long after sunset. The cake was a 6-tier masterpiece of white chocolate and raspberry, the bride's request. It was elegant, clean, adorned with hand-painted sugar flowers that Megan, my sugar artist, had started crafting last week. It was beautiful, and it made me feel like I was building my own coffin. As I boxed up sample cakes and finalized the design sketches, I stared at the final page of the contract. My fingers lingered on the signature. Ryan's signature. The same signature on the letter he left on our kitchen table years ago when he left me. Cold. Me. Final. But that was the past. This was business. Or so I told myself again. The next morning I picked up my phone and called Megan. "Megs, I need you here early tomorrow. We're not just making a cake. We're going to make the cake." Her voice on the other end was cheerful as always. "Got it. You want sugar flowers that look like they were grown in heaven. I'm your girl." I managed a small smile. "You always are." As I locked up the bakery and stepped out onto the quiet street, I took a deep breath. Tomorrow I would walk into Ryan's wedding. I'd walk into a room full of people who once looked down on me, who laughed at my dreams, who whispered behind my back, But they wouldn't whisper tomorrow. They'd stare at the cake, at the work, at the woman I had become. Let them. I wasn't that naive 23-year-old girl anymore. I wasn't crying into cookie dough over a man who thought wealth and status defined value. I was Emily Harper. And I was about to crash a wedding with style. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before dawn, the pale blue light barely creeping through the lace curtains in my bedroom. My stomach twisted into knots that even the strongest herbal tea couldn't untangle. I had never felt fear and determination wrap themselves so tightly around me. One was trying to choke me. The other was holding me up. Megan showed up just after 6, armed with a box of newly finished sugar flowers and a confident smile. "It's go time," she said, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she walked into the kitchen. "We're going to make jaws drop." Julia arrived minutes later with 2 travel mugs of coffee and a face that looked like she hadn't slept much. She handed me mine, eyes scanning me. "You good?" I nodded, even though the tremble in my hand said otherwise. "Let's just get it done." We loaded the cake with meticulous care, packing each tier into separate insulated crates. The sugar flowers, delicate and lifelike, were packed into a climate-controlled case. Megan and Julia triple-checked everything, down to the last gold leaf accent. By the time we set off for the Adams estate, the van looked like a miniature fortress on wheels. The Adams estate was the kind of place that made you question your life choices the second you drove through the wrought iron gates. White marble columns framed a mansion that looked ripped from a European fairy tale. The manicured gardens glittered with dew and money. And right in the center of it all stood Ryan Anderson, grinning for a photo next to a vintage Rolls-Royce. He hadn't changed. Same polished shoes. Same overconfident smirk. Same air of smug entitlement, like the world owed him something, and had the audacity to be late delivering it. As we unloaded the cake crates, I saw his eyes land on me. Then recognition. Then laughter. He turned back to the photographer, said something, and they both looked at me. Mirk. The same smirk I remembered from the night he told me I was too sentimental for the real world. I gritted my teeth and carried the top tier inside with both hands, feeling the sugar flowers shift slightly in their foam compartment. My heart thudded with every step. This wasn't just a cake anymore. It was a weapon, symbol, a Trojan horse. And they had no idea what was coming. Inside, the ballroom looked like it had been dressed by royalty. Crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, gold-trimmed everything. Guests in designer outfits drifted from table to table, sipping champagne and offering each other air kisses. This was the world Ryan wanted to be part of, the one he told me I'd never belong in. And yet here I was, Emily Harper, baker, business owner, woman on a mission. As I finished stacking the final tier, I felt someone approach behind me. I turned to find Madison Adams herself, the bride-to-be, standing with her hands clasped politely in front of her. She was beautiful. Not the fake, forced kind of beautiful you see in magazines, but naturally elegant. Blonde hair twisted into a low chignon, a designer white robe embroidered with her initials, and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in days. "You must be Emily," she said softly. I wiped my hands on my apron and extended one. "That's me. Your cake's almost done." "I've heard a lot about you," Madison said, her voice unreadable. "From Ryan?" I asked, instantly regretting the sharpness in my tone. "From Ryan," she confirmed, then paused. "But mostly from your work. You're incredibly talented." Something in her voice caught me off guard. Sincerity, maybe. Or something else. "Thank you," I replied, still wary. Madison leaned closer. "Can we talk privately? Just for a moment?" I followed her into one of the estate's many sitting rooms. The door clicked shut behind us, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the chandeliers hanging above. "I need your help," Madison said, skipping the small talk. "With the cake." "No," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "With something much more important." I raised an eyebrow, unsure if this was some kind of bizarre test. "Go on." Madison stepped closer and pulled out a tablet from her clutch. "My family, Adams Corporation, they're not who everyone thinks they are. They've done terrible things. Illegal things. And Ryan's involved. My pulse quickened. What kind of things? She swiped through images and documents. They forge documents to drive down property values. They buy up low-income housing, displace families, demolish schools, all to build luxury complexes. And Ryan's the one laundering the finances. He hides the money trails, manipulates tax reports, makes it all look clean. I stared at the screen. The numbers, maps, the photos of evictions. I couldn't breathe. I want to expose them, Madison said. And I want to use your cake to do it. Blinked. You want me to what? She looked me straight in the eyes. There are reporters here today. Influencers. People who can spread the truth faster than any lawsuit can bury it. If we hide this data, USB drives, tiny ones, inside your sugar flowers, and if you deliver the right one to the right guest at the right time, it'll all come crashing down. My mind reeled. She was asking me to commit social, and possibly legal, suicide at her wedding. But then again, this wasn't just any wedding. It was Ryan's. The same man who crushed me, mugged me, left me because he thought success only existed in skyscrapers and spreadsheets. And now he was standing on a throne built on lies. I need a moment, I said. I walked out to the terrace, breathing in the fresh air. I thought of the families Madison mentioned. The schools gone, the homes bulldozed, the children forced to sleep in shelters. I thought of the way Ryan laughed when I cried the night he left me. I thought of the sweet spot, of Julia, of Megan, of every customer who ever said, "Your baking made my day." I thought of the little girl I once was, dreaming of sugar and butter and bright windows full of cupcakes. And then I turned back inside. "Give me the USBs," I said. "Let's burn this empire down with sugar." Back at the sweet spot that evening, the scent of lemon zest and melted butter hung in the air, but none of us felt comforted by it. My hands were still shaky as I laid out the USB drives on the prep table. Small, silver, and ordinary looking. But the contents they carried. Explosive. Julia stared at them like they were tiny bombs. "Are we really doing this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "We are," I replied. Madison gave me full access to the documents. Bank transfers, fake shell companies, internal memos, everything. Her family's empire is a sandcastle built on pain. Megan leaned over, picking up one of the USBs. "And we're going to stick this inside." "A flower?" "Not just any flower," she said with a wry grin. "A masterpiece." Julia sat down, rubbing her temple. "We're not journalists, Emily. We're bakers. If this blows up in our faces, we've already been underestimated," I cut in. "That's our advantage." The plan was dangerous, reckless, brilliant. We'd create 10 sugar flowers with hollow centers. Inside each, a USB drive would be embedded, each one containing a segment of the Adams Corporation's crimes. A digital trail of blood and greed disguised in pastel petals and pearl shimmer. One flower would be placed on each tier of the wedding cake. The rest would be packed in a decorative box as part of a gift that Madison would hand-deliver to specific guests. Influencers, bloggers, 2 investigative journalists, and a non-profit housing advocate Madison had personally invited. Timing was everything. The files would be encrypted and programmed to automatically send once the recipients plugged them in. That way, even if someone tried to stop it, the damage would already be done. "We're going to bake a revolution," Megan whispered as she sketched out the revised cake blueprint. "And they'll never see it coming." The following days were a blur of planning and precision. During the day, our bakery ran as usual. Cupcakes lined the display case, regulars came in for coffee, and little kids pressed their noses to the glass to watch Megan pipe frosting roses. But behind the scenes, we were in full operation mode. Julia coordinated with Madison through encrypted messages. Megan ran multiple sugar mold tests until she created petals that were both stunning and functional. I reviewed each digital file, making sure nothing could be traced back to us. On the third night, as we were packaging the USBs, the bell above the bakery door chimed. and everything froze. In walked Sylvia Adams, Madison's older sister, a woman known for her cunning eyes and colder heart. She wore a beige coat, the kind that probably cost more than my entire bakery's rent, and her gaze swept across the shop like she was appraising it. "Emily Harper," she greeted with a smile so sharp it could slice fondant. "Hi, Sylvia." I walked forward, heart pounding. "Can I help you?" "I just wanted to check in." Her eyes landed on the nearly completed sugar flowers drying on the rack. "Madison said you were handling the cake. And with a wedding this important, I thought I'd come make sure everything's perfect." Megan, cool under pressure, stepped forward with practiced cheer. "Everything's going beautifully. Would you like to see a sample?" Before we could stop her, Sylvia reached out and picked up a flower from the tray. "Real one. Thank God." Megan smiled. "We use a special modeling technique to get the edges so realistic. It's kind of a bakery secret." Sylvia rolled the flower between her fingers before setting it down. "Interesting." She turned back to me. "You've come a long way, Emily. Still, I hope you know what you're doing." Her voice was polite. Her eyes were daggers. After she left, the three of us collapsed onto stools. "She knows something," Julia said, panic creeping into her voice. "She suspects," I corrected. "That's different." Megan looked at me. "Do we abort?" "No," I said. "We move faster." That night, we moved the entire operation to Madison's guest house on the estate. It was riskier but closer, and under Madison's protection. We worked around the clock, alternating shifts, practicing the final cake assembly with surgical precision. The day before the wedding, Madison called a meeting. "I've invited everyone we need. Reporters, 2 lawyers, a housing rights group. They'll all be here. All you need to do is deliver the cake and the flowers. When I make my move, you'll know." "What if your family catches on?" Julia asked. Madison stared out the window. "They already know I'm different. But they don't know how far I'll go." That night I slept for 2 hours. Maybe. At dawn, the sky turned a pale orange as we loaded the final cake into the van. The sugar flowers were packed in velvet-lined boxes. USBs secured. Frosting flawless. Megan exhaled as she secured the final tier. "We're either going to prison or to the front page." I smiled weakly. "Maybe both." At the Adams estate, staff buzzed around like bees. Chairs were draped in ivory satin. The aisle was framed by imported white roses. A live string quartet rehearsed near the fountain. But all I could see was Ryan, standing at the far end of the courtyard, laughing, untouchable, until today. I took a deep breath and lifted the first tier onto the table. My hands didn't shake this time. Not anymore. This time I wasn't just a baker. I was the reckoning. The wedding day unfolded beneath a flawless blue sky. If I didn't know any better, I'd have thought the universe was mocking us, giving the illusion of a perfect day before the storm hit. Every detail was exquisite, meticulously curated to impress. From the marble welcome sign etched with Madison and Ryan in gold foil, to the cascading orchids framing the altar, this was the kind of event that made headlines in high society magazines. But none of those details mattered to me. All I could focus on was the cake. Our cake, standing like a silent giant in the center of the grand ballroom. 6 tiers of precision and art, draped in fondant so smooth it looked sculpted from porcelain. The sugar flowers Megan had worked on for weeks shimmered in soft pastels under the crystal chandeliers. Each one perfectly placed. Each one holding a secret. The guests flowed into the ballroom like perfume. Elegant, polished, expensive. The kind of people who spoke in half-smiles and casual cruelty. Who clinked champagne glasses while silently calculating net worth. And in the middle of it all stood Ryan Anderson. His tux crisp, his expression smug. I watched from the far side of the room, adjusting one of the flowers on the top tier with a calmness I didn't feel. Behind me, Julia moved through the guests, subtly handing out small boxes, each containing a sugar flower with a USB inside. A custom favor, we'd told them, from the bride's personal design. Madison's plan was as genius as it was risky. Megan passed me a discreet nod. All favors delivered. All USBs ready to fire. I swallowed hard and whispered, "We wait for her signal." Then Madison walked in. The crowd stilled. Cameras lifted. Gasps of admiration followed her down the aisle. She wore a gown of ivory silk that hugged her frame like it had been stitched by angels. But what struck me most wasn't the dress. It was her face. Steady. Almost too steady. She reached Ryan at the altar and took his hand. He smiled down at her, confident and clueless. I watched as the officiant stepped up, flipping open his leather-bound book. Then, before a single word was spoken, Sylvia Adams, Madison's sister, stepped up to the microphone. Her voice rang out clear and composed. "Before we begin, I'd like to say a few words on behalf of the Adams family." Froze. Julia's eyes darted toward me from across the room. Megan's hand tightened around the tablet we'd hidden beneath the cake table. Sylvia stood tall, her designer gown gleaming. Today is a celebration. A union between two powerful families. But more importantly, it's a reminder of the legacy we uphold: honesty, integrity, and community leadership. Liar. I looked to Madison, waiting for her next move. And then, she took the microphone. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was calm. "Thank you, Sylvia. But I think it's time for a different kind of speech." Sylvia blinked. "Madison." "I've been quiet too long," Madison continued, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "I've let my family dictate the story. I've let lies build palaces and crushed lives be dismissed as necessary sacrifices. But today I take that power back." The crowd murmured. Cell phones lifted. People sensed something was happening, something real. Madison turned to Ryan. You knew what my father and Sylvia were doing. You helped them bury the evidence. You signed off on forged contracts. You laundered money through shell companies. You destroyed communities for profit." Ryan's face twisted. "What the hell are you doing?" Madison's voice rose. "I'm telling the truth." I reached into my pocket and clicked the button on the trigger device Megan had programmed. Silently, the USBs activated. In seconds, every recipient's phone buzzed with incoming files. Images, documents, recordings. I looked around and saw them reading. One man's jaw dropped. Another woman gasped, covering her mouth. Madison turned back to the guests. "Look at your phones. Look at the truth. This is what the Adams Corporation has been doing behind closed doors. And Ryan Anderson, my fiancé, has been helping them." Pandemonium broke out. Ryan lunged toward Madison, but two of her invited security guards intercepted him, holding him back. "You've ruined everything," Ryan shouted, red-faced and desperate. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," Madison said coldly. "You're a man who thought power would protect him. But not today." At that moment, the grand doors burst open. Detective Collins entered, flanked by officers in plain clothes. He walked to the center of the room and raised his badge. "We have arrest warrants for Sylvia Adams, Ryan Anderson, and 4 members of the Adams Executive Board for charges including financial fraud, illegal evictions, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice." Ryan's legs buckled. Sylvia tried to run. 2 officers caught her before she reached the back door. The room descended into chaos. Gasps, shouting, flashing cameras. The press guests Madison had personally invited were already live-streaming the scene. Ryan was handcuffed and dragged out of the ballroom. He passed me, his eyes locking onto mine. "You," he spat. "You did this." I didn't flinch. "No, Ryan. You did this. I just made sure the world saw it." Madison approached me slowly. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she didn't cry. She just reached out and took my hand. "Thank you, Emily," she said. "You saved more than this wedding. You saved lives." As the ballroom emptied, guests whispered in stunned silence. The wedding was over, but something far more important had just begun. And for the first time in years, I felt more than vindicated. Felt powerful. The chaos after the arrests left a strange stillness behind. Guests who hadn't already fled the ballroom stood in clumps, stunned and murmuring, their fancy shoes shifting uncomfortably against the marble floor like children caught in the middle of a classroom scandal. The wedding was done, its illusion shattered like a dropped champagne glass. And yet I felt whole. I stood there for a long moment just breathing. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for years, ever since Ryan left me and made me believe that being from a small town meant being small-minded, finally lifted. It didn't matter that I wasn't wearing designer clothes or sipping champagne from a crystal flute. I had brought down a corrupt empire with sugar, sincerity, and a network of women who believed in doing the right thing. That feeling was better than any revenge I had ever dreamed of. Madison was the last to leave the ballroom. She walked beside me as we passed the grand entrance hall, the light from the towering windows pouring golden warmth across the checkered floor. Her hand clutched a small envelope, a list of families the Adams Corporation had hurt, the ones she was determined to help first. "I'm not going back to that life," she said softly. "I've called off everything. The wedding, my partnership with the company. It's all over. I'll probably lose everything I used to care about." I looked at her. "You still have your name. And your dignity. That's worth more than all of this." She smiled. Not one of those polite, practiced smiles I'd seen on her before. This one was real. Tired but real. "I want to invest in your bakery," she said. "Not for profit. For purpose. Let's build something new out of the ashes. A place that actually gives back." My heart paused. "What do you mean?" She turned toward me, eyes steady. "Let's create a community hub. Second location. We'll use it to teach baking, offer job training, and serve families affected by everything the Adams family destroyed. We start fresh. Sweet Spot 2.0. I blinked, overwhelmed. "You'd walk away from a trust fund to help me teach strangers how to bake?" She tilted her head. "They're not strangers. Not anymore. They're the reason we did this." I didn't answer right away. But something inside me said yes before my lips did. Because I wasn't the same woman who once let a man define her value. I had faced my past and used it to create something powerful. Yes, I thought. We can do this. 3 months later, the sign above our new bakery read, "Sweet Endings and Beginnings." It was built in what used to be the Adams Corporation's secondary office building, a cold, gray structure now transformed with flower boxes, pastel paint, and the smell of cinnamon rolls that drew people in off the sidewalk like a magnet. Inside, we hosted baking classes every week, for single moms trying to make ends meet, for kids who'd lost their schools, for teens trying to learn skills that would give them a shot at a better future. Megan ran most of the classes, her hands still as magical as ever. Julia handled operations, her sharp mind making sure everything ran smoothly and legally. Madison used her connections and remaining assets to build partnerships, charities, educational groups, housing advocates. She didn't just walk away from her old world. She burned the bridge behind her and never looked back. We had our opening ceremony on a rainy Saturday. Dozens of families came, some wearing donated jackets, others bringing homemade thank you cards. There were tears, laughter. One child even brought me a lemon cupcake he had made himself, beaming with pride. "You're the lady who stopped the bad guys," he whispered, as if I were a superhero. "No," I told him. "I'm the lady who bakes. But sometimes, that's enough." Later that day, Madison and I stood behind the counter, watching the community space come to life. Job interviews in one corner, a free pastry workshop in another, a family counseling session quietly happening in the back room. "You remember the wedding cake?" she asked. I laughed. "I'll be dreaming about sugar flowers for years." "I kept one," she said. "The top flower. I had it preserved. It's on my desk now. A reminder that beautiful things can carry powerful secrets." We watched the children laughing as they tried to pipe buttercream roses onto cupcakes. This right here was the sweetest revenge. Not the headlines, not the downfall, but the rebuilding, the legacy we were creating. And in that moment, I realized something even deeper. Ryan hadn't just underestimated me. He had freed me. By walking away from me, he had unknowingly opened the door to something so much greater. A life that wasn't confined by his limitations or his definitions of success. I looked over at Madison, at Julia and Megan, at the faces around me. Hopeful, smiling, full of second chances. We weren't just survivors. We were architects. Change. Justice. Of something real. A month after we opened Sweet Endings and Beginnings, something unexpected happened. It was a rainy Thursday, the kind of day where the scent of warm cinnamon and vanilla clung to the air like a soft hug. We had just wrapped up a kids' baking class, and the bakery buzzed with laughter as the children proudly showed their parents trays of messy but heartfelt cookies. I was wiping down the counter when I heard the bell above the door ring. First, I didn't look up. The rain had brought in plenty of customers seeking warmth. But when the room quieted slightly, and I heard the sharp sound of dress shoes on tile, I turned around. Ryan Anderson stood in the doorway. His once perfect hair was damp from the rain. His suit, while still tailored, hung slightly off his frame, as if it no longer fit quite right. He looked older, tired, and not just from the weather. Madison emerged from the back room and froze. Julia, who had been restocking pastry bags, stepped protectively between us without saying a word. Ryan raised a hand. "I'm not here to cause a scene." "Then why are you here?" asked, keeping my tone calm but firm. He looked around the bakery, eyes lingering on the mural of bright sugar flowers we'd painted on the far wall, a symbol of the cake that changed everything. He finally spoke. "I saw the news. About the community programs. The second location. The families you're helping." His voice was quieter now. "You did what I never thought possible, Emily." I narrowed my eyes. "That much is clear." He stepped closer. "I came to apologize." Silence followed. Julia crossed her arms. Madison said nothing. "For what exactly?" he asked. Ryan exhaled, running a hand through his wet hair. "For how I treated you. For laughing at your dreams. For calling you small town. I thought success meant cutting ties to where you came from. I didn't understand. That strength looks like this." He gestured around the bakery, to the families seated at the tables, to the little girl in the corner licking frosting off her finger, to the counselor comforting a crying teenager near the window. "I thought I was above it all," he continued. "But I wasn't even close to standing beside it." For a moment, the only sound was the clink of a spoon stirring coffee. Then I nodded. "Apology accepted." Ryan blinked. "That's it." I smiled, not unkindly. "Forgiveness doesn't mean I forget. But I've moved on. This place. These people. They matter more than bitterness." He looked away, then back at me with a hollow smile. "They offered me a plea deal, you know. I'll do time. Probably not much. My reputation's gone though." I didn't say anything. He started to turn, then stopped. "You ever think we might have made it if I hadn't been such an ass?" I considered the question. I really did. And then I answered honestly. "No. Because you were never going to see me. Not really. You wanted me to become someone else. I just wanted to grow." He didn't argue. He just nodded and walked out into the rain. After he left, I felt something strange. Not joy. Not triumph. Relief. Because the version of me that once cried over Ryan's cruelty was gone. She had been replaced by a woman who had built something from the ashes. Who had risen. Not in anger but in purpose. That night, the bakery was warm and full of life. A local jazz trio played by the window. Kids from the neighborhood gathered around a table as Madison taught them how to twist croissant dough. Megan piped roses onto a birthday cake shaped like a storybook. Julia organized the donation board near the door, where people could contribute baking supplies or volunteer time. And I I stood by the counter, watching it all unfold. My hands no longer trembled when I held a whisk. My smile no longer wavered when people mentioned Ryan's name. We had become more than just a bakery. We were a second chance. Quiet revolution. Home. The next morning, we received a letter from one of the women whose housing had been saved by the evidence we exposed. She wrote about how she and her 2 kids had moved into a new apartment built through the community fund. About how her daughter wanted to become a baker, just like Miss Emily from the cupcakes. I taped it on the wall next to the other letters. Stories of hope and rebuilding. They were better than any review. They were the reason we did this. Madison joined me a moment later, holding 2 cups of tea. "You okay?" "I am," I said and meant it. Ryan showed up. "I know." She handed me a cup. "I watched from the security monitor." "Of course you did," I laughed. She leaned against the counter beside me. "Do you ever miss the person you were before all this?" "Thought about it." "No," I said. "Because she had to break to become this version. And I like her better." The weeks that followed brought a calm I hadn't known in years. Not the kind of calm that comes from things going right, but the deeper kind, the kind that grows when you finally stop pretending, when you faced everything and chosen to rise anyway. Every morning, I unlocked the door to sweet endings and beginnings and inhaled the scent of rising dough, brewed coffee, and something even sweeter, purpose. We had started workshops for teenagers who'd dropped out of school. Megan taught them piping techniques and sugar art. Julia handled resume building and customer service training. Madison, now a full-time partner, had become the face of our outreach, working with local nonprofits to rebuild the very communities her family once helped destroy. And me. I stayed in the kitchen most days, sleeves rolled up, flour on my cheek. Creating. Building. Listening. But it wasn't until the mayor's office called that I realized just how far we had come. They invited us, me, Madison, Julia, and Megan, to the ribbon cutting of a new housing project being built on what used to be Adams Corporation-owned land. The very land we had fought to reclaim through the scandal. "It's only right," the mayor said, "that the women who brought the truth to light cut the ribbon." That morning I wore a simple pale blue dress and my old favorite flats, the same ones I used to wear when I could barely afford rent and walk to work to save on gas. As I stood on the small stage, surrounded by news cameras and families waving from the audience, I felt a kind of peace I didn't know existed. The mayor handed me the giant ceremonial scissors. I smiled and said, "Let's make room for something better." And I cut the ribbon. Afterward, we hosted a celebration at the bakery. The place overflowed with laughter, music, and stories. The walls were lined with framed letters, photos from the wedding expos we were now invited to, and even a local award we had just received, Business of the Year for Social Impact. The best part. The children. They filled every corner, frosting cupcakes, drawing pictures of their dream bakery, and learning how to knead dough for the first time. One little boy pulled at my sleeve and said, "Miss Emily, I want to be like you when I grow up." I knelt beside him and smiled. "You'll be better than me." Madison brought out a tray of cookies shaped like keys. "To new homes," she said, handing them out one by one. That night, after we closed the bakery and cleaned up the last crumbs, the 4 of us sat around the prep table with mugs of hot tea. For once, no one was rushing. No one was stressed. We just sat. "I can't believe it's only been a few months since that wedding," Julia said, shaking her head. "It feels like a lifetime ago." "Because it was," I replied. "That life is gone. And good riddance." Megan raised her cup. "To sweet endings. And even sweeter beginnings," Madison finished. We clinked our mugs together. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and blooming jasmine through the streets of Willow Creek. The lights from the bakery windows cast a warm glow on the sidewalk, drawing in a few stragglers who smiled as they walked by. One of them stopped. An older man with a camera slung over his shoulder. He peeked through the window, then knocked gently. "Open the door." "Sorry to bother," he said, smiling kindly. "I'm doing a story on local businesses that made a difference. Someone told me this place changed everything." Mind if I come back tomorrow for an interview? I glanced back at the glowing interior. The mural, the pictures on the wall, the girls laughing over tea. I turned back to him and said, "We'd be honored." Because this wasn't just a revenge story anymore. It was a legacy. Emily Harper's journey started with heartbreak, mockery, and being told she'd never be more than a girl with a whisk in her hand. But instead of lashing out, she rebuilt, and turned the very thing that made her feel small into the force that changed lives. Her story is a reminder that revenge doesn't always have to be loud or cruel. Sometimes the best revenge is living well, staying true to your values and proving, not through words but through action, that you were never the one who needed to change. If Emily's story inspired you, share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own worth. Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more powerful stories of truth, justice, and redemption.